part of Australia called Coin. I'm going to actually show you where it is so that you have a sense of where I am. Uh, so let me just show you this map of Coin. So this is where I am in Coin, and I'll just zoom out so you get a sense of where exactly in Australia. So that's my background here. I call this whole peninsula. You can see this, right? It's sort of a peninsula that sort of comes out of the mainland, right? And then it goes very close to Papua New Guinea. So notice how this peninsula here is where, as I'm sort of in the belly of this peninsula. Now this town where I am is Goin, and now you can also see that it's 36 degrees here right now. But you can also see that I'm actually sitting outdoors. तो जब यहाँ पे साया होता है तो साए के अंदर हवा चलती रहती है. It's not bad at all. But धूप में the temperature is unbearable. So anyway, I wanted to give you a sense of where I am because that's where I am giving you the session from. So I will actually use this context where I am throughout my exemplification of subaltern linguistics. So because subaltern linguistics, as I explain, it's not something we do as a theory, but it's something that we do as practice. And when do we do practice? We do practice in the present, right? Why? Because present is the only time we can act. We cannot act in the past and we cannot act in the future. Now notice I'm just doing something here which is actually creating a grammatical category. Now in our work as linguists and my own training as a linguist, and forget training as a linguist from my primary school onwards, whether I'm learning English or at what my Boli was called Urdu, which I don't like the name, I prefer Boli because the names Urdu and Hindi were essentially manufactured and engineered by the British in order to create divisions between people. And you can see how successful they were. So that's why I don't like to use the word Urdu or Hindi. I would prefer that it's Boli. Because Boli mein we can accommodate for each other. We understand the variations. Obviously, हर किसी की बोली different होती है. आपके घराने की बोली different, मेरे घराने की जो परिवार की बोली different. There will be differences, but that's not a problem. We can negotiate and we can still interact with each other. So notice, even though there have been hundreds of years of engineering around the division of Urdu and Hindi, which is probably at its peak today, most people in their everyday Hindi and everyday, Urdu are still mutually intelligible. And that's why, agar main aapse abhi jo baat karoon, so the reason you can understand it is because it's mutually understandable language. तो नोटिस करें कि हम लोगों को डिविजन्स जो क्रिएट किए स्ट्रक्चरल फंक्शनल एंड देन क्रिएटिंग these genealogies created a use, it was used essentially, linguistics was used in order to create the divide and rule policy. So the divide and rule policy that we are all aware of is not a new thing. What we need to realize is the way that it actually operates is not necessarily through a political maneuvering, not necessarily just through that, but it's actually through the academic knowledge production. So knowledge production है, that itself is the basis of the divide and rule. क्योंकि आप नोट करिए कि वेस्टर्न नॉलेज जो हम लोग आजकल प्रैक्टिस करते हैं और जो हम लोग PhD स्टूडेंट्स को हम लोग ट्रेन करना चाहते हैं, हम हर always asking for creation of new knowledge. What does that mean? What that means to us we can interpret it as is that our goal in higher education and research is knowledge production. Knowledge is the goal. Now, that for me is a bit of a funny thing. मुझे हंसी आती है कभी-कभार. क्योंकि knowledge is an infinite entity, right? It's infinite. There is no limit to knowledge. So if you set a goal in your life, which is a goal that is endless, limitless, it's infinite. So what are you doing really then in that case? What you're doing in that case is that you're setting up yourself to failure. And that's why we can keep trying to seek knowledge. The more knowledge we seek, the more resources we have to utilize, but we will never end because there is no end to knowledge. It's fun. And especially if the way that we are creating it is through dividing things up into structures and functions and keep dividing them and keep naming them differently. Now, one of the things that I learned living with the people of the Gold River, I call them people of the Gold River. I showed you the peninsula, Jonah, Chonj nikli bhi Australia ki na, but I showed it to you. Now, that whole peninsula is essentially land of gold, right? Yahan pe, this is where one of the places where the gold rush happened in Australia. Or jab gold rush hua, to the tremendous harm that the greedy people did to the people of this land, you just cannot imagine. But at the same time, this is one of the last frontiers for Australia, in a sense that even into the 1947, the so-called symbolic year when the British gave us independence. And notice it's a symbolic year, because how can we really be independent if our knowledge production is not independent? So we had something that we have to think about. If our economies are not independent, if our education is not independent, if none of these things are independent, then if our militaries are not independent. In fact, militaries जो active हम जो देखते हैं हमारे ज़माने में, they were all created by the British and then split as part of partition. So these are all colonial hangovers. And that's the part of the reason I talk about subaltern, the term subaltern, because subaltern means we're no longer thinking in those terms. But notice, I know there's a lot of theory around subaltern theory. I know that, and that is one of the reasons I adopted that term. But my interest is not in theory. My interest is always on practice. What can you practically demonstrate as something that you have done? For me, that is knowledge creation and knowledge making. It's something that is observable and visible, not something that is written in words, published in books that we cannot verify, because it's all written in extremely abstract language and highly specialized and technicalized language, which will take years for a person just to learn. And then after they learn it, they don't really have any way to observe the phenomenon. So all we're doing is essentially the way that we have been creating knowledge under the influence of the colonial, educational systems, which is essentially all of our educational systems. They emerged during the time of colonization. So we really need to rethink what's going on and what is going on. And we really need to reevaluate the ways in which we create knowledge. And so that is what subaltern linguistics is. It's a practice. It's a practice of recreating knowledge and relearning how to create knowledge, going back to the grassroots and learning through not through books, but through living, through experiencing, through doing, and then through observing your five senses. So I was telling you about these people of the Gold River, right? So I've been learning so much by their beautiful sharing. I mean, let me introduce this land to you, these people of the Gold River, because I am living as a guest on their land. In fact, if you see in the background, you can see that my motorhome is parked there. That's my nomad mobile. That's where I live. And जो आपको दरख्त नजर आ रहा है, जिसकी बहुत अच्छी छांव नजर आ रही है, ये जो दरख्त है, इसको यहाँ पे कहते हैं मिल्की पाइन. तो ये मिल्की पाइन की छांव जरा देखिए आप, वो उधर से दरख्त से लेकर इधर तक आया हुआ है. मैं तो अक्सर वक्त उधर ही बैठा होता हूँ छांव के नीचे दरख्त के. तो उन्होंने, ये जमीन मेरी नहीं है ना, ये जमीन इन लोगों की है. They met me, and I was lucky enough to share my birthday here with these people. And I have 3 of the people that I met on my birthday had shared my birthday. So it was sort of like, they welcomed me after that, and they said, आप कहाँ campsite पे रहते हैं? आप इधर हमारे यहाँ पे मिल्की पाइन है, इसकी छांव बड़ी अच्छी है, आप अपनी गाड़ी इधर ही खड़ी कीजिए, आराम से इधर रहिए. So I've been here, मैं 3 हफ्ते हो गए. Now notice, I'm not the teacher, I'm not a professor, I'm not doing research. I'm living my life. My lectures, my work, my writing is outwards. It is not, it's not inwards in the community. Here what I do is I live. जब उन्होंने मुझे ज़मीन कहा कि इधर तुम छाव के नीचे रहो, तो मैंने देखा इधर बहुत कचरा था. There was a lot of garbage around. Coke के डिब्बे, beer bottles to TV. It's really bad. The tree hadn't been taken care of because of neglect and because of oppression, right? These people are Aboriginal community, and the Aboriginal communities, the way that they live on their communities, you sometimes have to wonder if you are living in a first world or a developing world country. Here, I think it is a developing world country. There's no facilities. Everything is super expensive. If you go to a supermarket to buy something like a frozen pizza, which in Sydney would be $2, here it will be $10. If you buy something like, the other day I bought an one potato. I'm not joking you. One potato, I bought it here in the store for $1.10. सोचिए आप 100 रुपए का एक आलू, क्योंकि यहाँ पे आलू काश नहीं हो सकता. यहाँ पे क्या काश्त हो सकता है? cassava. But they don't grow cassava here. They bring the potatoes in and people can't afford it. So imagine there is no economy here. It's an Aboriginal community. There is no economy here. यहाँ पे 2 दुकानें हैं और एक pub है. और हर दुकान के में एक पेट्रोल पंप है. Go down to a 300 kilometer, a liter of diesel is $1.10. If you get a liter of diesel here, it's $1.80. Why? Are the petrol companies not making enough profit to be able to manage this difference? It's just greed, right? There is no economy. There are no jobs. People have very little to work for, especially any job that is based on indigenous knowledge. Now we're talking about indigenous languages here in this relation. And so the key thing, and that's one of the things I'll really keep pointing out today, is for indigenous languages to be sustainable, we have to be able to enable economies in and through those languages, right? So if we cannot create economies in and through the languages, and if people are dependent on their ability to live is dependent on learning some other language, whatever that other language might be, then we are essentially creating a situation where language shift is going to be a natural phenomenon. How can you stop that? People need to make a living. So what we really need to be doing is thinking about how can we create economies in and through language. Now, I'll share with you actually to start off something that happened just earlier today. यहाँ पे, according to my time, it's almost 4 o'clock. So just about 3 hours ago, 1 बजे मेरे time, which was 11 o'clock in the morning in Malaysia, they had they had a book launch, and I'll share it with you. That's why my Facebook was open. So I'll share this with you. Um, oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to share it with you. I will be able to share it with you, but I need a second. Here. So I'll just play. I won't play the whole thing. It's just 2 hours ago. And this is a book launch. I don't know if the sound and volume is working, but anyway, I'm just sharing this with you. You can have a look at it yourself. So this is University of Malaya, that's in Kuala Lumpur, Language and Linguistics. So that's the Faculty of Language and Linguistics at the University of Malaya. And so they had a book launch for a set of books that came out of a project that Stephanie Pillai, myself, Stephanie is at the University of Malaya, myself, and most importantly, the community members in the Portuguese Malacca region, which is it's Malacca, you know, the region Malacca, and this language, this language group is called Cristang, and they speak essentially a Creole. So that's the Creole, which is called Cristang is a Creole, they call it. And they were, you know, what we did was we created language travels where we had a group of people from different parts of the world who, through Free Linguistics conference, which was being hosted at University of Malaya. So essentially they sent us a set of a little payment. We created a project, and through the project, we created some initial drafts of books, and we took a lullaby, बच्चों की एक नज़म, and we turned it into a performance जो बच्चों ने, जो उनके elders की, जो उनकी dance troupe है, उनके साथ उन्होंने perform किया था. So they used that performance and that training and that song to teach the tourists who had come in about the song and teach them to perform the song. So essentially, it was a kinesthetic project. So in terms of language learning, it's kinesthetic because it's full body engaged, right? So people are dancing, they're moving, they're singing, they're clapping. All of these things are happening. So essentially, it's something that happens very much in the present, and you participate in it, which means you take action in it. So notice we are working in the present, and in the present we can act. So education for us used to be about action, about being able to do things rather than be able to just theorize things. So going back to my Dada example, he was an engineer not because he was educated as trained as an engineer, but because he was a practitioner, right? That was the important thing. The person who can do things is the person who is then asked to teach things because they know what they are doing. So notice that's the same thing. Here is the same example. It's the kids who are teaching their own poems, and all of a sudden these kids who the parents and the community elders told her were not necessarily doing really well in school, all of a sudden they became these teachers, and they took over, and they became lively, and they became energetic, and we saw it happening within the period of 4 days of how they changed and evolved from being shy and timid to being confident and teachers of their own language, because they knew the dance moves, they knew the words, they knew the understanding of the words. And if they didn't, they had their elders who could explain more. So essentially through that activity, the children learned about their culture and language, they learned the performance, and they got paid for it. So imagine that, a child gets paid for the language that they have. And so through that, we created this initial set of material, and then we worked through, and Professor Leslie Barrett also really helped us with this work. And we really revised all these things, and we turned them into 2 books, University of Malaya Press, which were released today. So now this community has books, which were essentially, we didn't have to pay for the books. The books came out of the project. And the project actually generated money for the community. So the first ever language travels that we organized, we raised about something like $7,000 for the community. And since then, because the community has learned how to do it themselves, they have the resources, they have the books, they have been running these programs for other people from different parts of the world, including different parts across Malaysia. They even had a dean's retreat out in the community where the deans learn how the language. So notice how the community has become an active part of maintaining their language through creating an economy in it. And notice, to do this, we didn't have to describe the phonetics or the morphology or the lexicon or the semantics. There was no need for it because language was being performed. And that's the key thing, why I like calling it boli. Boli, not language. Because boli is always performed, right? It's a performative. Boli, agar bole nahi to boli nahi hai. Boli to jab bolne se hai na, to boli is the action. Right? हमारी अपनी बोली, that is what I want subaltern linguistics to think around. अपनी बोली में सोचें, not through English grammatical categories, क्योंकि वो तो structural और functional divisions पे based हैं, और वो तो genealogical categories create करते हैं हमारी तबाही के लिए. I'll give you an example. Brahawi, they call Brahawi a Dravidian language. Why? Brahawi and Balochi are mutually intelligible even today. Why do they call Balochi Indo-Aryan and Brahawi Dravidian? I'll tell you why. Because 1930s, 20s, 15s में गोरों की एक mythology थी कि इंडिया जो था पूरा Dravidian था, and the Indo-Aryans came and they drove them down. But they found no real evidence for it. So they created this guy who was a civil servant who essentially collaborated with one of the people who we will call a traitor. So Sardar, the traitor who collaborated with a British civil servant who wrote up these descriptions of Brahawi. That's the foundation knowledge about Brahawi. You can all Google it up yourself. This is our history. This is the history that was created for us by our colonial masters. Why should we trust anything that they say to us? If their goal was to destroy us, why do we think that the sciences that they taught us and they want us to follow are ones that are going to help us? In fact, no. We continue to do that stuff. Now we're learning to do it ourselves, and we keep dividing ourselves. We keep giving ourselves more and more and more names. पहले शुरू हुआ हिंदू और मुसलमान की फसाद, उसके बाद अब कितने मुसलमान में ग्रोह हैं, कितने हिंदुओं में ग्रोह हैं. तो ग्रोह तो तोड़ने पे है ना, टूट तो चलती रहती है. You will never stop breaking, because if the focus is on breaking, then there is no stop. It's an infinity. And infinity, if that's the goal, then it's not looking good for us. So that's one of the things. I stopped living in the bush. I moved into a motorhome. I bought it about 2 years ago, and I've been living in the bush. And I've been learning not from the books any longer. I mean, yeah, I do refer to books and I still write stuff, but I try to learn from observation, from living in the present, from who I'm with, where I'm at, what I'm seeing with my eyes, what I'm experiencing as a person. That is my teacher. So for example, यहाँ के लोग, they don't like the term Aboriginal English. They think that's not a good term at all because it gives them a unified identity. They like to call their own language broken English. And they like that term broken English because that gives them a sense of a lingua franca. Notice, broken English, if you want to think about it, is boli. That's boli. Now, I'll tell you something else really interesting. इधर के लोगों के पास, they don't have a writing system. Okay, if you check this out, the indigenous Australian populations did not have a writing system. मगर writing system होता क्या है? Writing systems तो एक visual representation है linguistic meaning की, है ना? That's what a writing system is, because it's a visual system. Writing systems are visual. बोली is always oral. तो notice करें हमारी अपनी बोली, भाषा, जबान और ये सारी चीजों को छोड़ दें, लैंग्वेज का टर्म ड्रॉप कर दें. बोली को नाम देने की जरूरत ही नहीं है ना. एक जगह से चलते दूसरी जगह चले जाएं तो लोग बोली समझ जाते हैं एक दूसरे की. आज भी मुझे पता है, I can go through most of Pakistan and North India and I will have no trouble. I can communicate with people in both. ठीक है, they will know I'm different and I will know they are different, but that's all right because we are different, because we're different people. हर किसी इंसान की अपनी किताब है. No two are the same. This is a metaphor I learned from a cowboy. Every person is their own book. Never the two books are the same. Even आपके भाइयों, जुड़वा भाइयों बेशक, they're still two separate books. So if we understand that, then we start understanding that the divisions that they set out in linguistics and traditional linguistics through which we have created documentary linguistics, right? So notice that, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. I absolutely do not question the integrity and the purpose and the desire behind what you're doing. But notice it's not your energy that is the problem. It is the direction that you have taken from the Western linguists that's the problem. Right, because we're noticing language, description and revitalization. Where is it happening? कहाँ नजर आता है हमको? ये सारी बातें थियोरेटिकली रहती है ना, हमें तो सिर्फ लैंग्वेज लॉस ही नजर आता रहता है. अगर डिस्क्रिप्शन और को रिवाइटलाइजेशन में लीड कर रहा होता तो ये बताइए आज की दुनिया में जितनी बोली है वो मेंटेन हो रही होती. आज हमको एंडेंजर्ड लैंग्वेज के बारे में बात ही नहीं करने की जरूरत. हमको इसके बारे में इसलिए बात करने की जरूरत है कि even though the linguists with all their documentation have been doing this documentation for the last 100 years, none of these languages are actually protected. Why? For the very simple reason that language doesn't exist. Boli exists. And Boli is only performed. Who performs Boli? The thing that is living. So it is the people who are the Boli. If the people are oppressed and they cannot make a living through their own Boli, then they will have to shift to something else. So बोली के अंदर हमको लोगों को रोजी देना है. बोली के अंदर उनको they have to get their living, decent living. That's all they want. So the people of the Gold River, this is what they tell me. I will share this with you. I'll share this with you. It's a छोटी सी poem है. मैंने लिखी थी. Anything that I write on land belongs to the land. I have to put my name on it for practical reasons, but I want to stress this, and I also share all my poetry first with the people and the community before I post it online or read it to anybody else. So this is because the reason is because these are words that I have learned from the wisdom of people of the land and from the bush that I live in. The bush has been my forest, and I'll come back to this and we talk about these things. Now, the people of Gold River want nothing and need even less. If the greedy man could read, they just want to be left alone. And as the greedy men withdraw, let them remember this. The bush is never owned. It is shared with all that make it home. And this is very personal to me, of course, because they have shared their land with me. And that's why I was giving you an example. This is an example of subaltern linguistics in a sense. Why? Because this is practice. Where can you practice? Where you are. So where am I? I'm living in place called Coin. यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है? I can see it. I can observe it. I live with people where I can see oppression. जहाँ पे the person who is the same age as me, actually is a month younger. If you see him, you will think he's 15, 20 years older than me. यहाँ के लोगों की लाइफ एक्सपेक्टेंसी बहुत कम है. ऑस्ट्रेलिया की तो हाई है, मगर एबोरिजिनल कम्युनिटीज की लो है. क्यों? बचपन से they give them sugar. There is no healthy. They're not allowed to be able to live from the bush as their ancestors lived, who lived a nomadic life. They are no longer allowed to live these nomadic lives क्योंकि सारी जगह तो ओनरशिप आ गई है लैंड की. नेशनल पार्क्स आर ओन्ड बाय द नेशनल गवर्नमेंट. प्राइवेट लैंड्स आर ओन्ड बाय प्राइवेट पीपल. सारी जो उनकी जो ज्योग्राफी उनको चाहिए थी वो ज्योग्राफी खत्म हो गई है. They cannot make a living out of their own indigenous knowledge. The only way they can make a living is to work for the greedy men, who are the people they see as the people who have taken away their lands. And remember, in this land, 1947, the year we got our symbolic independence, is the year जब यहाँ पे last ट्राइब्स को इन्होंने कैप्चर किया था. So the last tribes that lived independently in the bush were captured not very far from here, another 60 kilometers north of here, and they were chained and shackled and walked from there to Coin and then further down. यहाँ के जो लोग हैं रहने वाले, they saw their दादा दादी, बाप माँ, चच्चा चच्ची, their generations of elders, they saw them with their own eyes being chained and driven out, walked out of these lands. Their language taken away, their children even today being forced to be sent off to bigger cities. Why? Because there is no high school in the whole of the peninsula, not a single high school. आप ये ऑस्ट्रेलिया की बात कर रहे हैं जो हम फर्स्ट वर्ल्ड को कहते हैं, ये अपने लोगों के साथ क्या करते हैं जो ऑस्ट्रेलिया के बाशिंदे हैं. इनको पास अगर नॉलेज अच्छी होती तो इनकी अपने एबोरिजिनल लोगों की कम्युनिटीज अच्छी नहीं होती. ये इनकी क्या नॉलेज है, यहाँ पे भी यही तोड़ लगाते हैं. गोल्ड रिवर, ये सारे एरिया में गोल्ड है, सारे एरिया के दरिया में गोल्ड है ये सोना. ये लोगों को ग्रीड नहीं थी because they did not associate gold with a symbol of value. Everything that we understand in today's world is a symbolic relationship. There is no such thing as a linguistic sign because what operates are symbols, and symbols operate across all ways in which we create knowledge. Just think about it. Maths में symbols, so-called religion जो है वो जो इसको nominalize कर दिया गया है वो उसके अंदर symbols, culture में symbols, language में symbols, literature में symbols, हर चीज के अंदर, physics में symbols, हर चीज में तो symbols operate करते हैं. It's symbols that help us. If you focus on symbols and the symbolic representation of what a symbol is and what a symbol can do and how symbols can be organized or disorganized, that's when you start to understand how knowledge making can be done in infinite number of ways. And to restrict it to two ways, which is a structure, function, and genealogy, is essentially suppressing those other forms of meaning making and those other ways of creating knowledge. So again, going back, writing is visual, but notice we have eyes, we see other things with our eyes too. And the indigenous communities here did not have a writing system. Guess what they did have? They have expressions and they have ways of identifying things. So somebody is there and they're calling you and you need to go pee first. You would say, no verbalization. From a very far distance, they have communicated to each other what the one wants and what the other will do first before they go. Notice, no oral sound, no visual writing system, but meanings are being construed and communicated. This is how hunter-gatherers, these are nomadic people, right? My own ancestors, your ancestors, we were nomadic people, most of us, right? Nomadic people. For nomadic people to survive, to be able to do these things, they have to have visualizations. Because imagine if you're a hunter-gatherer and you make a lot of noise by vocalization, then you will not be able to hunt or gather much because things will be disturbed. So instead of using verbal, they use visual, but visual not based on literacy, right? Notice now, why am I coming to these observations? Because I'm living here. I've been here for 3.5 weeks. Uncle and auntie whose house there is, this is their house. Piche, if you can see, this is their outdoor kitchen. It's a lakdi ka. That's how they still cook. यहाँ पे सूखी लकड़ी बहुत है, दरख्त काटने की जरूरत नहीं होती. सूखी लकड़ी जमा करके लाते हैं, उससे देखते, and they have different kinds of woods, indigenous woods, and they use different kinds of indigenous woods to create and cook different things. Yeah, outdoor cooking में खाना पकाते हैं, that's where they live, and this is where I'm sharing, right? And this weekend they have gone away for a sorry business. A sorry business in broken English is what we will call a funeral. So they don't like the word funeral; they call it sorry business. So they've gone away for sorry business, and yeah, the house is locked, but they told me just use the compound and stay around and this, right? So this is where I'm learning through observation. I'm seeing what they do. I see what they do with each other. For example, they're all multilingual, even today. In addition to broken English, they have English and they have their ancestral language, not to a very large degree always, especially for the younger generations, it's not there as much, but it exists. Now, what's happening though, is क्योंकि सबको स्कूल जाना होता है, through schooling, and active participation and encouragement of the schooling for the kids to abandon black English and their mother tongue dialects. हर कोई स्टैंडर्ड इंग्लिश पे जाए, हर कोई जो एक ही पैडागॉजी से पढ़े, एक ही चीज पढ़े. That everybody needs to do the same thing. Through that, and through no economy being available in a local language, there is no social economies. There are no local economies anymore. And when you don't have a local economy, people's self-respect is false, right? Agar if I have to, I really go down just to get a job so that I can work for you to get a bit of money so that I can feed myself and my family. Guess what? I will start losing self-respect very quickly. I will start losing dignity very quickly. And once you take away the dignity and the self-respect and the integrity that a person has, you've really broken the person. And then there's no limit, right? So essentially, what keeps a person a human being is their integrity and self-respect, because that's what keeps them honest and makes sure that they will not do anything wrong, because it's their own integrity and their own self-respect. Once you break that through economic marginalization and through linguistic non-recognition. So what is language? Like language is a symbolic system. What does it symbolize? It symbolizes the knowledge that our ancestors developed in land over generations, right? It's our inheritance. हमारी बोली हमारी inheritance है ना? अब ये देखिए, दो लोग भाइयों में अगर लड़ाई हो जाती है, inheritance अगर एक मिलियन रुपए की हो तो लड़ाई हो जाएगी. हमारी inheritance जो थी, हमारी बोली थी, वो हमसे ले ली गई और ली जा रही है, स्पेशली विद इंडिजिनस लैंग्वेजेस. उनकी बोली ली जा रही है उनसे, छीनी जा रही है उनसे. उनकी बोली उनकी इनहेरिटेंस है. उनकी इनहेरिटेंस से वो अपनी कम्युनिटीज को हार्मोनाइज कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि उसके पास अंदर उनके पास नॉलेज है, अंडरस्टैंडिंग है. ये कॉलोनियल आइडिया है जंगली लोगों का. हमारे यहाँ जंगली लोग नहीं होते थे. एबोरिजिनल लोग जंगली नहीं है. कैसा जंगली? राइट. सो मैं एक मेटाफोर क्रिएट कर रहा था towards working towards the poem. अगर I abandoned it after I talked to one of the elders here. So the metaphor was कि essentially कि दो दरिया आ रहे हैं, तो कि जब दो दरिया आते हैं, जब मिलते हैं, तो बड़ा एक दरिया बन जाता है. This is something we observe all the time. मगर अगर क्या होगा कि एक दरिया जो है वो तो लालच का दरिया हो, और दूसरा दरिया तो बड़ा कलरफुल रेनबो दरिया है, और जहाँ पे मिलना था मिले नहीं. वो लालच का दरिया घुस गया रंग बिरंगी दरिया के अंदर, और उसने रंग सारे खाना शुरू कर दिए. ठीक है. और ये भी एक मेटाफर क्रिएट कर रहा था कि उसको फिर रेजिस्ट कैसे करें और वापस कलर कैसे क्रिएट करें और लालच को कैसे रिड्यूस करें. मगर उसने कहा मुझसे कि नहीं नहीं नहीं, अपनी आंखें बंद करके ना यूं, ब्रदर, स्टॉप टॉकिंग टू मी अबाउट दीज कलर्स, दे बर्न माय आईज. यूं ना सर पकड़ के आंखें बंद करके मुझसे कहता. आई डिडंट गेट हिम, क्योंकि एनीथिंग दैट आई हैव लर्नड इन लिंग्विस्टिक्स अबाउट कलर टर्म्स, जैसे बर्लिन एंड के की रिसर्च आप लोगों ने भी पढ़ी होगी, कि कलर टर्म्स की कैटेगराइजेशंस, किस लैंग्वेज में दो रंग हैं, दो में तीन हैं, किस में चार हैं, इनकी हायरार्की क्या है ना. जो कलर की हायरार्की से हमने पढ़ी है सेमेंटिक्स में ना, मैंने भी पढ़ी थी सारी. तो मेरी यही अंडरस्टैंडिंग थी ना. I had never really lived with a group of people who don't name colors. So in their language, he did not grow up with names of colors. So for his people to be called names of colors, it's oppressive to him, because in his language there were no colors. Its colors were introduced to him through colonization. And notice, color terms is one of those terms in linguistics. ठीक है. और वो हायरार्कीज क्रिएट करती हैं. मैंने उससे कहा, भाई ये क्या आप कह रहे हैं, आई डोंट गेट यू. तो उसने मुझे इधर ही कहा, वी वर राइट हियर एक्चुअली, आई विल शो यू. ये पीछे एक मिनट, मैं आपको दिखाता हूँ. पीछे ये शेड नजर आ रहा है ना आपको, हम लोग इधर शेड में बैठे हुए थे छाँव में. तो ही आस्क्ड मी टू, उसने कहा शेड से जरा बाहर आओ. वी केम आउट, और एंड दैट्स व्हाट वी लुक्ड एट. बाहर जंगल है, और उसने कहा मुझसे, देखो सब कुछ देखो. मैं कह रहा हूँ देख रहा हूँ. कहता है मुझे नजर आ रहा है ना. मैंने कहा हाँ. कहने लगा बस ये तुम्हारी आंखों के लिए है. इट्स ओनली फॉर योर आईज. So that's what he told me. It's only for your eyes. It took me a few days before I started even understanding what he said and the significance of what he had said. What he was saying to me is that we do not unnecessarily categorize and name things. We don't need to. We can see them. हमें क्या जरूरत है पढ़िए इस दरख्त को नाम दें और उस दरख्त को नाम दें। हमें पता है इस दरख्त के अगर दांत में दर्द हो कि इसका ये बाग निकाल के जरा पीसो ऑयल के अंदर, इसे लगा लो गाल के अंदर, तुम्हारा दांत का दर्द सही हो जाएगा। आपको नजर आता है कि इस पेड़ के नीचे जो जड़ है उसमें जड़ में से निकालो, उसका पेस्ट बनाओ, चोट लगी है उस पर लगा दो, चोट सही हो जाएगी। उन्हें पता है कि इस पेड़ के नीचे रहो और उस पेड़ के नीचे आपको ये देखो दो पेड़ नजर आ रहे हैं छोटे, एक तो बड़ा है ना ये मिल्की पाइन, और ये छोटा जो पेड़ है ये आम का पेड़ है। अब ये मुझे पता है, अब मैंने बचपन में अपने अपने अब्बू से सीखा था, वालिद साहब से, जिनकी जो इनकी गोरखपुर में जिनकी पैदाइश थी। तो उन्होंने मुझे ये कहानी सुनाई थी कि बचपन में, उन्होंने कहा था एक बचपन में मुझे कहानी सुनाई थी कि कोई ट्रेवलर था, वो जा रहा था जमीनों में से, तो उसे ये नहीं पता था कि दरख्त कौन सा है, तो वो आम के दरख्त के नीचे सोने लगा। तो वहाँ पे सोने लगा और जब कुछ अरसा गुजरा तो उसकी स्किन में इन्फेक्शन होने लगा और उसको बीमारी होने लगी। तो वो किसी गांव में कहीं गया तो कोई किसी बुजुर्ग ने देखा, उन्होंने कहा कि तुम क्या आम पेड़ के नीचे सोते हो? तो उसने कहा हाँ। उसने कहा ये तकलीफ तुमको इसकी वजह से है, तुम ये करो, नीम के पेड़ के नीचे सो, नीम के दरख्त के नीचे सो। अब ये मुझे कहानी सुनाई थी मेरे अब्बू ने व्हेन आई वाज अ किड। मगर अब ये कहानी के अंदर देखिए इंडिजिनस नॉलेज और इंडिजिनस साइंस है ना, वो मुझे होशियार कर दिया कि आम के पेड़ के नीचे रहना सही नहीं है। मुझे आम के पेड़ है, मैं उसके नीचे नहीं रहूंगा, क्योंकि मुझे पता है उसके नुकसान हैं सेहत पे। अब ये साइंस है ना, ये साइंस हमारी किधर है? ये साइंस हमारी बोली के अंदर है। तो बोली इज इनहेरिटेंस, बोली इज साइंस, बोली इज ओनली ओरल, और बोली हमेशा चेंज होती है। क्योंकि अभी मैं ये बोल रहा हूँ, आप इनसे 5 मिनट बाद मैं इस बात को रिपीट करूँ किसी तरह से, तो बोली बदल जाएगी मेरी। तो बोली is never consistent. So the very idea that we can describe something which is dynamic and fluid into something that is a static description of a language is a futile act. It's an impossible act. You cannot take something that is dynamic and turn it into a two-dimensional static text. Just cannot happen. And then using them for education or prescription or revitalization, that just doesn't work. So मेरा दोस्त जो एक है गिलाद सकरमैन, वो इजराइली कहता है, वो उसे हिब्रू नहीं कहता आजकल की ज़बान को। वो कहते हैं इसराइल में हिब्रू नहीं बोली जाती, इजराइली बोली जाती है। क्यों? क्योंकि हिब्रू तो लिविंग लैंग्वेज नहीं थी। जब लोगों ने उसे बोलना दोबारा शुरू किया, तो क्योंकि इसराइल वाज अ ग्रुप पीपल फ्रॉम ऑल पार्ट्स ऑफ द वर्ल्ड हैड सेटल्ड देयर, so they had come in with all these different languages and backgrounds. So essentially through their intermingling and things, an Israeli evolved, which is what he calls that language, no longer Hebrew. It's a different language because it has a different history now. So notice how these things are tied to language, namings of languages, descriptions of languages, and by blinding ourselves to these sort of descriptions, what we are essentially doing is are setting up ourselves to fail, right? Now, I've given you this very long introduction, which is in a sense my own talk. So, but I do want to share a few slides with you because I want to clarify a few things. So let me just, I won't go through the whole presentation. There's really no need, but I will go through a few slides. Of course, I already dedicated this to my Dada and Dadi. Uh, and this little poem I wanted to sort of share with you. हम लोगों ने सबने पढ़ा होगा Stopping by the Woods on a Lovely Evening by Robert Frost, right? मेरे high school के syllabus में था, you know, and he leaves the woods because the woods are lovely, dark and green, but he has promises to keep and miles to go before he sleeps, or something like that, right? I don't remember the exact lines. And that's the kind of poetry and English poetry that many of us grew up with. Now, and people who do English literature sort of studying things. And I realized that, wait a second, what is the real message of this poem? It just doesn't make sense, because by that time I was living in the bush. So you can see this picture, I took it myself, and I questioned this sense of reality, which I've also tried to capture through the image and the various inlayings of the image. Uh, I was sort of left in a haze. What's going on? Wait a second. These woods are owned by someone who lives in a town. So the person who can own wood, that doesn't make sense to me. And if you live in the bush, and I shared it with you, Aboriginal knowledge is nobody owns the bush. Everybody, everything that's part of the bush is part of the bush. The bush together is alive. So this very bush that I'm part of, this is part of the longest living forest in the world. These forests have been around since before the dinosaurs. They're millions of years old, right? And the amount of diversity of life here is incredible. How can you own woods? How can you own other life forms? How can you brand a cattle your own? One of the things I will tell you here briefly, I'll tell you later about this. But so I want to leave these promises behind for a second, and I choose to retreat into the woods to listen, to learn, and very importantly, to unlearn the ways in which divisions are created, and to learn how harmonies are managed. Because a bush, the woods are always in harmony. Of course, there's no question that some animals, some things will eat and some things will become prey. Yeah, that's it. That happens. And things will die and evolve, and that happens. Notice evolution does not happen of a single species. In the bush, the whole bush co-evolves. Notice how, if talking about the fundamentals of knowledge making, let's think about this concept of biology. And biologists, what do they study? They study life, right? If they study life, then they should be able to define life. You guys can Google search it. आप खुद Google search कीजिए. Definition of life. What you will find is there is no clear definition of life. There is no definition of life. What they have are characteristics or features of what can be considered living. Notice that is a categorization which is based on human intervention and human desires, because they put themselves as top. It's a divisive science where they don't even define life. How can you create a whole discipline called biology if you cannot define life? How can you do linguistics if you cannot define language? Language is not communication. Language is used for communication. Language is a semogenic system. Language is inheritance. Language is science. And language is a dynamic system. These are definitions of language. And if you define language in certain ways, you realize that the kind of stuff we do in linguistics cannot continue. We really need to reform. And we need to learn from our elders. And that is, we need to, like my dada, create the practices, create the sugar mills. And then once you have set them up, then you are a person who is qualified to teach engineering. Why? Because you have established this sugar mills. Practice first, right? It is practice, not theory. That is what we need to do. And in doing this, as I've just said, if biologists cannot define life, let's just forget all the categories that they do. That's why learning from the bush, learning and observing from the bush through your 5 senses, all of your senses involved, experience life in its wholeness, and not its dependency on things like that are not visible to us in our observation, like this presentation to a degree, but even more stuff on YouTube and recorded stuff. There is no observation behind it. It has to be something that you believe in or do not believe in. Therefore, if you believe in it, you may be mistaken. And if you don't believe in it, you might also be mistaken. Who knows what's going on, right? So we need to think about things very basic, go back down to the very base and make a distinction that we can observe. There's a distinction between a world that is material, biological. आपको मेरे पीछे नजर आ रहा है, दरख्त है, आम का दरख्त है, ठीक है, कुर्सी जिस पे मैं बैठा हुआ हूँ, कंप्यूटर जिस पे मैं आपसे कनेक्शन में हूँ, ठीक है, this is a material biological world, ठीक है, मैं हूँ biological, पीछे बर्ड चिड़िया होंगी, कीड़े मकोड़े होंगे, चूटियाँ तो हजारों हैं, ये सब life forms हैं, right? Now, because we cannot define life, I would rather not make a distinction, because we can realize that actually what applies to biological applies to material, right? So everything that is material, biological is material. So everything that applies to material applies to biological in a way, right? So, but not always vice versa. But that doesn't matter. Let's just combine them. Material, biological. What is it made of? It's physical. It has existence, right? On the other side, we also know there is a world that doesn't have physical existence, but we have ideas, we have thoughts, we have theories, we have cultures, we have religions, we have language, we have all these things in our mind, right? They all exist in our mind, but they are not material. You cannot touch religion. You cannot touch culture. You cannot touch language. You can hear language when somebody is performing it, jab boli hai, but other than that, you cannot experience boli. A reading of it or a recording of it is a recording of it, or a visualization of it. It is not the same as Boli, which is performed in time, in present, right? Which is a material biological action. But our understanding and interpretation of anything symbolic is purely in our minds based on what our symbolic systems are. So, for example, if 150 years ago, Urdu and Hindi were 99% mutually intelligible, and today they are not, it's because those symbolic systems थे और symbolic patterns जो overlap करते थे, वो diverge हो गए, differentiate हो गया, differentiation हो गया. Why? Through explicit, explicit social engineering carried out by the Europeans, in our case by the British, by deliberate things, right? Why? Because they changed our socio-semiotic world. They changed the way that we conceptualize the world in ways that our minds operated, right? जो लोग कहते हैं the colonization of the mind. That's that, it's shifting it away, becoming practical again. Decolonization is not a theory, it's a practice. It's saying I don't need to have these terms and concepts really because they are not observable. Focus on the observable. When you focus on the observe, आपको नजर आएगा कचरा है आसपास, you will clean up the कचरा. आपको नजर आएगा इधर इकोनॉमी को जनरेट करने की, रिवाइव करने की जरूरत है. You say I won't live here in 3 days, I will live here for 3 months if I need to, 3 years if I need to. जमीन तो इन्होंने मुझसे बांट के ली भी है, वैसे मेरे पास है रहने की जगह. I don't need anything else. I have a job that from the University of Sydney, which pays for my other expenses, right? What else do I need in life? So I can just do things. So I'm still already starting to think of various different plans through which we create a shift in material, biological, and the socio-semiotic. How? By cleaning things up. When you clean up the environment, things look visually nice. When things look visually nice, people start taking pride in their place. As they take pride in their place, their attitude changes. Notice the relationship between material, biological, and the socio-semiotic. Notice that the material, biological is made of atoms, but everything that is not based out of physical is symbolic. We actually give physical, material stuff symbolic meanings, right? We do that all the time. Example, color terms. And notice the people here did not have color terms. They chose not to classify in certain ways. This was a decision that they didn't need to. Why? Because they could see things. They didn't need verbal categories for certain things. It's not a less language or a more language or features, this feature or that feature. No. It's a geographical experience of life through what needs to be done. Verbalization of through Boli is just one minute aspect of it. And it is not the Boli that is being oppressed today. It is the people that are oppressed. Right? So if you want to revive a language, it's the people you have to take the oppression away. And you take the oppression away and things start changing. That's it. Take away the oppression. Reduce the oppression and the material biological world, we know this through observation, it will start to reharmonize. Because nature stays in balance. The reason that this bush is 2 million plus years old is because there has been a sustained balance. And if you change that balance, the bush will change. Why? Because I will tell you what life is. Life is from the soil, right? It is why. Let me tell you, life is. Why is life chemistry? Sorry, can you turn off the mic? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so what is life? I will explain to you what life is. The biologists cannot, but I will tell you because the bush tells us. I don't make this up. You can observe it. यहाँ पे जो दरख्त हैं, the trees that I have around here, these trees you do not find in Lucknow, right? Or Karachi, where I was born, or Sydney, where my apartment is, right? सिडनी में जो दरख्त हैं, वो लखनऊ में, कराची में और क्वीन में नहीं होंगे. यहाँ पे जो परिंदे हैं और जानवर हैं और जो कीड़े मकोड़े हैं, वो उधर नहीं होंगे और उधर के इधर नहीं होंगे. क्यों? क्योंकि जियोग्राफी चेंजेस एवरीथिंग. यहाँ के लैंडस्केप, देयर आर सर्टेन ट्रीज, मुझे लोगों के यहाँ के लोग बता रहे कि ये यहाँ का वॉटल ट्री है, ये जो है रिवर वॉटल है. अगर आप इधर से चले जाएं समंदर के पास, तो जो सी जो है सॉल्ट वाटर वॉटल है, वो उसके पत्ते अलग होंगे, उसका फूल अलग होगा. क्यों? क्योंकि जियोग्राफी बदल गई, मिट्टी बदल गई, मौसम बदल गया. That changes everything. Now humans were nomadic, right? This part were nomadic, which meant they had a region that they walked around and lived around, which would be hundreds of kilometers because they would walk around. And so they would create the categorizations that they need based of tens and hundreds of thousands of years. People have been living on this land for over 100,000 years continuously. Their Boli and their inheritance of the Boli will have every information they need about this land. And when you label their language as X, Y, or Z and force them to learn English and break their links with the land and the language, you're essentially disharmonizing the population. They can no longer function the way that their ancestors did because everything is changed. And that is creating the loss of language. So, because the language is dependent on a human experience, it's sociosemiotic. Notice, sociosemiotics does not operate on mathematics. But material biological world tends to. Why? Because mathematics is a purely symbolic system where the symbolic representations and interpretations of the symbols are reduced. So one is always one, right? If you're talking metaphorically, yes, we can talk about it differently. But notice metaphor is sociosemiotic. If you're talking about it mathematically, then one is always one. बचपन में I remember a movie I used to love, अमिताभ बच्चन शशि कपूर की 2 और 2 5, है ना? हम वो हैं जो 2 और 2 5, आप लोगों को याद होगा, है ना? गाना बचपन में मैंने सीखा था, सुना था. तो 2 और 2 5 symbolically, yes, you can, metaphorically you can create that meaning. But mathematically, 2 plus 2 is always 4. Why? Because the symbols and the operators of the symbols and the meanings of those symbols are made non-dynamic. They are made static. So once you close down a system and when you make a system static, then you increase the reliability of the system because you will get the same outcomes every time. Why? Because you have reduced the dynamicity. But notice in the socio-semiotic world, everything is fluid and dynamic. Its language is always, बोली is always changing. मेरी बोली आज वो नहीं जो आज से 10 साल पहले थी या 20 साल पहले थी. आपकी भी नहीं है. We all change. बोली changes. It's dynamic. You cannot box it up. But when you try to box it up through descriptions of grammar and language, you are essentially suffocating it, right? दरिया जो है बहता है. दरिया का पानी बहता हुआ अच्छा होता है. जब दरिया में पानी बहना बंद हो जाता है तो कोई उसमें नहाना नहीं जाता. यहाँ पे भी नहीं. यहाँ पे दरिया का पानी, आसपास के इलाके में दरिया में पानी बहुत कम हो गया है क्योंकि ड्राई सीजन, बारिश नहीं आई है. तो दरिया में जहाँ पानी नहीं बह रहा है वहाँ पे कहीं कहीं तालाब तो है, मगर कोई उसमें जाके नहाएगा नहीं क्योंकि वो पानी सड़ने लगता है. ये हमें पता है, ये हमने बचपन में मुहावरा सीखा था. पानी, दरिया पानी चल रहा हो तो उसमें से पियो. पर अब तो वो भी नहीं पी सकते क्योंकि हमने उसको खुद ही बेरा कर दिया है. उसमें इतने केमिकल्स डाले हैं, इतना गंद किया है कि वो दरिया का पानी अब पीने के लिए नहीं रहा. उसमें तो मछली भी नहीं जिंदा रह पाती. ये देखें, दिस इज द डिफरेंस दैट बिटवीन जो हमारी एबोरिजिनल नॉलेज थी, हमारे एल्डर्स की जो जनरेशन और उनसे पहले की जनरेशन जो इस तरह की जो एजुकेशन वो प्रैक्टिस करते थे, वो ओरसी में करते थे. अब आप ये नोट करिए, ओरसी के अंदर अगर मैं एक चीज नहीं परफॉर्म कर रहा और आपसे कह रहा हूँ करो, तो आप मेरी बात पे भरोसा नहीं करो, नहीं माने आप मेरी बात, कह के झूठा है. अगर मैं आपसे कहता हूँ तुम ये नहीं करो और मैं खुद कर रहा हूँ, तो आपको शक होगा ये क्या मसला है. तो ओरसी के अंदर जब एजुकेशन ओरल बेस्ड है, प्रैक्टिस और टीचिंग एक ही होती है. बिकॉज यू कैन नॉट टीच एनीथिंग इफ यू नॉट प्रैक्टिसिंग. ये ओरसी का कॉन्सेप्ट है एजुकेशन का. नोटिस हमारी यहाँ मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द कल्चर्स वर ओरल बेस्ड, है ना. Why was Persian one of the only written language? What is the simple reason? Because the Persian language was used by the traders. The traders, that's it. बाकी सारे ज़मानों में they did not have writing systems as much. Why? Why would they need it? There is no need for a writing system. Writing system तो traders को चाहिए होता है. This is where the Europeans came as traders. They took over trading. They destroyed our trading, destroyed our relationships, destroyed our harmony, created all these divisions, gave us a trading system through which we are now poor and dependent, and an education system that reinforces that. Why? Because we are broken into these disciplines. In linguistics, cultural studies, religious studies, anthropology, sociology, ये discipline, वो discipline, हर किसी की boundaries ऊंची सी ऊंची हैं. कहाँ से हैं ये boundaries? Everything operates on symbols. Every single discipline. Every single discipline that evolved during the colonial era is based on divisions, but they're all symbols. They're all symbols. So why do we even need these disciplines? As we talk about subaltern linguistics, I keep saying it's not a name, it's not a theory, it's a practice. Get rid of the categories. Just like the people of the Gold River, they don't name things always. They don't name colors. They don't need to do things by your eyes and observation. If your आपका मोहल्ला साफ नहीं है तो साफ करें उसको. Don't expect somebody else to do it. Create an economy through it. Change everything. Get your kids to create projects. वो जाएं सफाई करें. अभी one of the things I wish I can do, I'm going to try to see what I can do. यहाँ पे सीजन आ रहा है रेन का. अगर कूड़ा कबाड़ पड़ा है जंगल में वो कहाँ जाएगा? दरिया में. दरिया से समंदर में. समंदर से we know that barrier reef इधर ही है. It's dying. So isn't it something that we can do? Take precautionary action. How? In the present. We're living in the present. That's why I'm living here. I'm creating these projects. I'm sharing these ideas. I'm living my life, not teaching them. One of the things I will tell you, and then I'm going to sort of shift gears a bit again, and then I will stop in a bit because we need some time for questions. So they have tons of things going on. I'm not doing research. I'm not writing paper. I'm not recording notes. I'm not taking notes. I'm not recording audio, visual, nothing. I'm living my life. Now, if you're living a life in a place, you live a life of a participating citizen, right? आप घर में रहते हैं तो घर साफ करते हैं, कमरा साफ करते हैं, बाहर बरामदा साफ करते हैं, you keep the house clean. आप मोहल्ले में रहते हैं तो मोहल्ले की कम्युनिटी की गलियां साफ करते हैं. You're doing it because you're living in it. Now notice, one of the problems is because literacy, which is visual, has become the tool of education. Because as linguists ने हम लोगों ने कभी सोची नहीं कि ये क्या हो रहा है literacy के साथ. They create a writing system which is one of the worst. They use phonetics. They use phonetic scripts. Phonetic scripts are arguably the worst form of writing system. Notice करें जब Cherokees ने अपने लिए खुद indigenous script बनाई, they did not use a phonetic script. They adopted even though there was no example of it for them. That's why Sequoia is such an important figure. They created a syllabic script for themselves. They created a syllabic script for themselves out of nowhere. Why? Because syllabic scripts it compensates for language variation. Whereas phonetic scripts highlight the variations. And the European linguists they love to create highlights and differences because that allows them to create more and more categories and labels based on classifications of categories that are abstract and theoretical. Even though in the real world, people are still mutually intelligible. हमें पता है, आपको पता है, we are mutually intelligible. So notice how the academic categories and the disciplines themselves create these problems and create the kind of issues that we need to resolve and come out of. So now let me move on further and just quickly show you a few more things and then I'll end. Is how do we understand the sensory systems? Now, because I said we live through our sensory systems, first of all, we need to recognize that not everybody has the same sensory systems. We know that. Yesterday, actually, kali ki baat hai, I went out to Pesco River to visit some people who live on a farm. And it's an off-grid farm, यानी कि वो शहर की ना उनके पास बिजली है, ना उनका पानी है, वो सब कुछ generate करते हैं, अपना maintenance सारा कुछ करते हैं. And they have a beautiful orchard, organic orchard. And I went there, and one of the caretakers of that place, वो बुश में था, उसकी 1990s की बात है. They've been there for 1980. 40 साल से they've been living there in the bush and they've created this farm. So one of the guys in the early 1990s, उसको घोड़े ने मारा नाक पे, इधर जहाँ पे आँखों के बीच में ना नाक पे इधर ऊपर घोड़े ने मारा लात, उससे उसके साइनसेस टूट गए. 1994 से उसको he has no smell. You know, I've actually thought about this a lot, but I've never really had a chance to talk to people who have no sense of smell at all. But when I talked to him, I realized he's so conscious of how he has to make decisions in his life now that he cannot smell. So, for example, उससे कैसे पता कि ये केरोसिन है या फिर ये पानी है? Because वो सूंघ नहीं सकता, हिला के तो पता नहीं चलता आराम से. Now, notice somebody's sense of smell goes away, their whole way of experience life changes. Sight or sound we know, it's much more common. Touch always around too. मेरे हाथों की skin, if I show it to you on the camera and if you touch it, आप लोग touch करके feel करेंगे कि मेरी हाथों की skin बहुत hard है. और हमेशा से बचपन से स्कूल में मेरे बचपन के दोस्त मेरा मजाक उड़ा रहे थे कि ये बुढ़ा आदमी है. हमेशा से मेरी skin hard है, मगर उसकी मेरी advantages भी हैं. मैं गर्म चीज़ों को टच कर सकता हूँ without any need for gloves. That's part of the reason I love cooking. और कुकिंग में मैं अपने हाथ इस्तेमाल करता हूँ. Why? Because I can handle more heat. क्योंकि मेरी स्किन टच है, हार्ड है. उन लोगों की स्किन जिनकी स्किन डेलिकेट होगी, they will not be able to do it the same way. So notice my whole experience of knife and who I am and what I do and how I do it is through the experiences of each of my sensory system, which we know changes and evolves. आंखें मेरी कमज़ोर होती हैं, कभी अच्छी होती हैं और सारी चीज़ें होती हैं. मज़ा जो है, टेस्ट, सुबह सुबह सोकर उठते हैं तो your taste buds are not that active. Later on in the day, they might be active. I don't know when your taste buds are active, but they're active at different times of the day. They respond to different things. So notice how everybody is different. Now what I've done here is I've grouped the sensory systems into group A and group B. Now this is a very important differentiation, and I want to explain this to you. Right, group A जो है ना, it can be either in our present or in the absence. So for example, आप लोग मेरी screen देख सकते हैं, maybe some of you can see my image as well, है ना? But you do not see what I am seeing, right? Because we do not share the sight right now. Even though you can see me and I can probably see you if I turn on my screen in a certain way. But we do not share sight. Sound, yes, if you talk on your mic, I will hear you. And because I'm talking on my mic, you can hear me. मगर जो मेरे ambient noises हैं, सब आपको नहीं आ रही हैं. And because many of your mics are mute, I don't hear anything in your background. We don't have a shared sound. Notice, in group A, this can happen. In group B, this can never happen. ठीक है, smell हो ही नहीं सकता कि I can smell something if it's not in present of me. Touch मैं किसी चीज को नहीं छू सकता if it's not present. हाँ, तसव्वुर कर सकता हूँ. I can think of it. I can imagine it. I can dream about it. I can dream about the biryani, right? One of the things we call it tihari. It's aloo chawal. I mean, it's like a biryani, but maybe aloo. It's called tihari in my boli. So this tihari, I can imagine how it tastes like. I can smell it. I can even imagine the warmth and the texture in my mouth. I can do that, but that doesn't mean that I'm having that tihari right now. That's not possible, right? Notice, group A, group B are very different. And I want you to observe that it is through group A that colonial education and knowledge building operates. And I want you to observe that in an oracy culture where education is based on oracy, it's group B through which everything works as well. This is smell, touch, and taste. The people of the Gold River, they live through their 5 senses. I am learning to do that. It's not easy because we have been dulled, especially if you've grown up in cities like I have, which are always, unnatural environments. We don't necessarily learn to identify things through smell or touch or taste, but here people do. So they can feel things and sense things in their skin, which I wouldn't be able to because I haven't trained myself. They can pick up smells and identify things from a distance that I cannot because I haven't trained my smell. Why? Because all my education was training my sight and sound in very particular ways, essentially through very restricted writing systems. And so essentially notice how what I'm trying to do is I'm moving us out of a traditional trap of thinking of language in ways and making language central for linguistics, taking us out and looking at us in ways in which we make sense of the world, the relationship between the material, biological, and the socio-semiotic, the use of symbols and the use of symbols in creating these meanings, and turning everything into essentially projects and things you do. And that's really what subaltern linguistics is about. It's creating these projects that don't exist right now, but creating them. Why? Because we want to create these harmonies. Where do you do it? You do it where you live. That's the only place you can do it. I'm living in Coin. I'm living with the people of Gold River. So I'm going to live my life here. And through this, if through my living of my life, I can shift or create certain things. For example, I have an idea of working with the local community elders. They have an old slaughterhouse, which I do not like. I want to recreate it and regenerate it into an orchard. and essentially a prof nomad's farm, where after the school is over, after like 4 o'clock, 4:30, the weather is getting better, the temperature is not that high, the parents and the kids come over, and we will create activities, educational activities. We'll teach them indigenous art. We will teach them how to use bow and arrow. We'll give them skills. The elders will do it. There's no money involved, right? It's just creating those spaces that don't exist because of the oppression of the schooling and the Western colonial categories that oppress us. And we know we cannot fight those. So I'm not fighting them. I can't fight the school system here. I can't. But what I can do is I can live a life where I create space for every day, 2 hours, 3 hours. I hang out and I learn from and share with the community. And through that, we turn as a horrible place with a horrible history and a past to something that the community can take pride in, and something the children can say, we built this. And because they built it, they own it. Nobody else owns it because it's Bush. The Bush owns it. So I'm just giving you an example of ideas of things to be done. There are things we can do anywhere. That's subaltern linguistics. It's creating practice. It's creating the economies. It's creating the material. It's creating the resources. It's cleaning up the place. It's getting the government talking to people. Talking to the government yourself, right? So we know, for example, because people from indigenous backgrounds don't have the kind of literacy and the language that is used to create policy making, you can't expect those people to necessarily raise their own voices and raise their complaints because they don't have the literacy or the language. They're outclassed already. So in a sense, instead of trying to document their languages, create advocacies, create materials, write to the government, write to the local ministry, write to whoever needs to be written to, work with the community to shape up the environment. If my dada was an engineer, for other engineers, go in and create whatever is needed to clean up our rivers, make our rivers breathable again and full of life again. It's a shame that we are killing our species, and we are the same. Hamari dharti ek hai, hamari mitti ek hai. And one of the points that I learned as a child, जो मुझे अक्सर यहाँ पे याद आती है, जब मैं यहाँ पे गोल्ड I'm living in the gold valleys, right? एक है बचपन में मुझे याद आती थी, सोनी धरती अल्लाह रखे कदम कदम आबाद तुझे, कदम कदम आबाद तुझे. And notice, this is Soni Dharti. This is not Urdu. Dharti is not Urdu. Soni is not Urdu. ये नोट करिए, ये हमारी एक एंसेस्ट्री है, हमारी एक सोनी धरती है ना. यहाँ की भी सोनी धरती है, इसलिए मुझे नज़म याद आती है. यहाँ पे सोनी नजर आता है आपको, दरख्तों में नजर आता है, सोनी नजर आता है, रिफ्लेक्शन. That's it, through visual, living, experiencing, observing. That's subaltern linguistics, taking action. You can only take action now. That's the difference. And this is the last thing. I started off with this issue, and I'm going to now wind it up with the talk with this same example. Earlier I said time with difference hota hai sirf present or non-present. Things you can act in, things you cannot act in. और मैं आपको ये बता रहा था कि हम नोट करिए, हमें सारे स्कूल्स में सिखाया जाता था प्रेजेंट टेंस, पास्ट टेंस, फ्यूचर टेंस. प्रेजेंट, पास्ट और फ्यूचर. इंग्लिश के अंदर खुद ही फ्यूचर टेंस एग्जिस्ट नहीं करता. Notice it yourself, we observe it. Because tense is marked morphologically. Come, came, eat, ate. It's morphological marking. Tense is morphological. Future के लिए it's not a morphological marking. हमें modality इस्तेमाल करना पड़ता है. I will come, I might come. We're changing a word. We're adding a new word. ये tense नहीं है. आप नोट करें, हमें झूठ सिखाया है अंग्रेजी के अंदर, और अंग्रेजी की कैटेगरीज हमारी लैंग्वेजेस पे भी डाली उन्होंने. हमको भी हमारा उर्दू में हम कहते हैं माजी, हाल, मुस्तकबिल, प्रेजेंट, पास्ट, फ्यूचर. हिंदी में दे माइट हैव डिफरेंट टर्मिनोलॉजीज नाउ, बट प्रेजेंट, पास्ट, फ्यूचर, ये हमको कैटेगरीज पढ़ाई. अब बोली के अंदर देखिए, बोली के अंदर हमारी आपकी बोली एक है, बोली के अंदर तो सिर्फ प्रेजेंट है, प्रेजेंट के अलावा है ही नहीं कुछ. ना हमारे पास पास्ट टेंस है, ना फ्यूचर टेंस है. आप खुद चेक कर लीजिए, अपनी बोली खुद बोल लीजिए, कोई ग्रामर बुक देखने की जरूरत नहीं है, बोली बोल लीजिए. खाया, खा, खा, चल, बोल, सारे वर्ब्स इंफिनिट प्रेजेंट में हैं. मैं खा रहा हूँ, मैं खा रहा है, नोट करिए, मैं खा रहा था, मैं कल खाऊंगा, ये मॉर्फोलॉजिकल चेंजेस नहीं है, ये आपका पूरा सिंटेक्स बदलना पड़ता है। टेंस नहीं है ये, हमारे पास नहीं है। था, चल, चल, चलूंगा, चला था। नोटिस करिए, मॉर्फोलॉजिकल नहीं। हमारी बोली में सिर्फ एक टेंस है। हमको अपने एंसेस्टर्स की जो बोली है उस पर फोकस करें, टर्मिनोलॉजीज इनकी कैटेगरीज को छोड़ें जरा एक तरफ, फोकस तो करें। बोली क्या है हमारी? सिर्फ प्रेजेंट। क्यों? क्योंकि हमारे एंसेस्टर्स वर वेरी अवेयर, यू कैन ओनली एक्ट इन द प्रेजेंट। The distinction between the past and the future is a semiotic distinction, because yes, things can have happened in the past and everybody may have a different memory of that past, right? इसीलिए हिस्ट्री बुक्स दे आर नॉट द सेम। हमारी आपकी हिस्ट्री है कि किताबें चार बताती हैं, है ना? क्यों? क्योंकि इंटरप्रिटेशंस ऑफ हिस्ट्री आर सोशियो सिमियोटिक, दे आर एंडलेस, दे आर इन्फिनिट। इट्स द मटेरियल बायोलॉजिकल दैट्स इंपॉर्टेंट, व्हाट इज विजिबल are the conflicts, are the negative consequences of these divisions. Notice how it's been perceptualized and created through a category of tense, और उसको जनरलाइज करके स्कूलों के अंदर डाल के बच्चों को यंगेस्ट एज से क्रिएट करते हैं ये कंसेप्चुलाइजेशन। पास्ट, प्रेजेंट, फ्यूचर। पास्ट में क्या करते हैं? दे गिव अस, टेल अस हिस्ट्रीज एंड मेक अस फाइट विद ईच अदर। दैट्स व्हाई दे क्रिएट अ पास्ट। नोटिस करिए, हमारी बोली में पास्ट टेंस नहीं है ना फ्यूचर टेंस है, सिर्फ प्रेजेंट है। व्हेन यू कैन एक्ट, दैट्स इट, और कुछ नहीं है। अंग्रेजों ने हमको क्या दिया? पास्ट। पास्ट में उन्होंने हिस्ट्रीज बनाई और हिस्ट्रीज पर लड़ा दिया। किसको क्या पता कौन सी पास्ट सही है भाई? यू कैन नॉट ऑब्जर्व इट, you just have to trust it. Who knows what? Nobody can experience it now, it's not observable. Notice is, you cannot take action in the past, it's not important. But notice we fight based on past. Future में क्या करते हैं? Marketing करते हैं। We don't have a future tense. English में भी future tense exist नहीं करता। What do they do? Future में they sell you things. Marketing doesn't exist without a future tense. Notice how it is. Unfortunately, one of the worst disciplines for this is linguistics, because we go in and we divide people up through language and dialects, divides and create divisions and labels, and through those labels and through the socio-political and problems and economic problems, essentially those divisions boil down to conflicts. And once those conflicts are created, they generate the next round of violence and more divisions. And we've been seeing that happening for the last 100 years. How does it enable? It is now we are part of it by recreating knowledge in the mirror of colonial knowledge. We are essentially not just legitimizing it, we are actually perpetuating. It's the way that we perform in academia, our actions in academia, that are responsible for our own subjugation. This is the irony of it. We are doing what the British used to do to us. We are now creating the categories of divisions that further oppress and divide us. We have learned from the British and we are perpetuating it. That was the colonial goals. If their knowledge was developed for achieving colonial goals, unless we abandoned and reassess and go back, in a sense, to thinking about our own needs, our own communities, recreating the bush and the harmony that was part of our ancestors' life. And the harmony and the bush can only be recreated when the conflicts are and peace is no longer talked about. I don't like the term peace and conflict, because you can't have peace without conflict. अगर इंडिया पाकिस्तान में आज अमन है, पीस है, तो यानी ये कॉन्फ्लिक्ट नहीं है, वॉर नहीं है। Peace and war are the two sides of the same coin. It's a bad term, it's a bad category. Harmony is a much better way of thinking. It's harmonization. Harmony के अंदर ये चीजें नहीं होती। Harmony अपने आप को maintain करती है, self-sustaining होती है. So we really need to relearn the metaphors from our own ancestors in our own boli. One of the things that I encourage my own students to do, and I try to do, and I encourage everybody to do, is अपने बुजुर्गों के साथ time spend करें and ask them about their life, early childhood, and the stories and things that they remember from their childhood that their grandparents have told them, and try to go back as far in time as you can for me, if I can, and I try my own dreaming, I try to do this as much as I can. I dream and we try to reconnect to my ancestors before the white greedy man ever landed on our shores. Because once they landed on our shores, nothing was the same ever again. So for me to think or imagine of a harmonization, I have to go back and try to reconnect with that era, which means I cannot take any of the luggage that I have learned through books in this community educational system with me, because they don't work. There is no clock, there is no time, there is no computer, there is no car. They don't work. So, in essentially, creation and thinking about how harmony would work, and to understand that, you will have to realize that humans live in geography. And geography is based on where you are and the weather that you have around and what you have around or not. Those are the things and those are the factors that create the kind of features and characteristics that we see in different parts of the world. उसको नाम ये जो भी दे दें, उसको normalize इस तरह भी कर दें. But it's the dynamicity of those variations that we find everywhere. And to create and support the empowered languages, we have to create those harmonizations for the people who spoke those languages. And once we do this, we will realize that we don't need to describe and do anything, and we create a world where we are all much happier to live in. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. I know I've been talking for a long time, and I'll just end with I'll probably just end here and thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmar, for such an interesting talk. And I have certain questions, but I would like to invite participants first. So if any of you have question, kindly unmute yourself and you can ask directly.
May I?
Yeah.
Sir. Good morning, sir. Ahmar, sir. Thank you very much for this mesmerizing talk. My actually observation, one can say observation or my viewpoint, we can say both. And at the end, I will ask the question. Like in 3-4 sentences, I will conclude. The thing is that when I was working for my MPhil and PhD, I have had experience from the communities. Those communities were tribal basically, from the Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka border, and that community is spread all over the 3-4 states. So they were saying, why do you need the data from our language, our community, cultural or festival related, whatever data you were asking about it? So we need the clothes and food. And that communities were actually like nomenclature, given nomenclature that they were the criminal background community. And post-independent or during independent or pre-independent India, they were settled in some sort of settlement, and that settlement were compounded by the British government. As of now, few reminiscences are there. So one thing is that, and another thing is that when we talk about subaltern, the very much idea of subaltern literature or subaltern studies from Partha Chatterjee sir to till the linguist or translator Gayatri Spivak madam, till these people, they do advocate from social point of view or as a social scientist. But the very much idea that you introduce on the basis of or with the background of Boli, so-called terminology or so-called concept of Boli, is very much mesmerizing or and enamored. One can enamored with this view. But when you think or when one can think from linguistic perspective, there are very much sects or segments or layers that we have to broke or that we have to break. And at the end, I could say when you have the laboratory or when you have the background of the aborigine or the Australian so-called geographical location, but the same sort of like background or same sort of data or corpus we can say have existed or existing in the African arena. For example, Kenya and Gambia. Those documentary I have gone through. That is why I'm giving this as a experiencing or observing phenomena, considering with this. And at the end, how subaltern linguists or how subaltern linguistics as a discipline can incorporate with anthropogenic geo-eco linguistics socio-cultural, and at the end, it can conclude or it can come under socio-linguistics as a umbrella branch. So these are the things, those cannot draw or those cannot or can interlink. That I want to get the explanation from you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. You've said so much in your observations and your commentary and your questions. I'm just trying to think about what sort of how I can best address the multiple layers of issues that you've raised. Perhaps the first one I need to clarify: subaltern linguistics is not a discipline. It's not a subdiscipline. It's not a theory. I keep saying that it's practice. Anybody who's taking action to create economies and using understanding of your sensory systems, not just even language, is an action, is practicing is practicing subaltern linguistics. That's it. It's practice. It is not a theory. I keep telling you this. I keep telling everybody this. Not a theory. It's not a discipline. It's not a subdiscipline. Please do not try to categorize it. That's not where it belongs. It's a practice. Do things. So now, how do you do things? By taking action. So if you find that, for example, I'll give you a really interesting example that is from Bangladesh. You can even Google it later on. This is a really interesting example of how language was used to address a problem that's sort of a communal problems in many parts of South Asia. In certain parts of the city, especially, certain parts of the city, we know that you go through the part and it smells really bad because people smell tea there, right? And that just smells disgusting. So in Dhaka, there was this street where the government was trying to take a lot of action, reduce it. There's all sort of signages, there's all sorts of messaging. Nothing was changing anything. Guess what they did? One day they watched everything and they wrote exactly the same message. Do not be here. But they wrote it in Arabic. Now, because they wrote it in Arabic, the local population did not understand it. And because it was Arabic, which people in Bangladesh see as a holy language, they did not pee there. So they stopped being there. They changed everything. Now, I don't know who created this project. If this person had any understanding of what they were doing in terms of language or semiotics, but that's essentially what they did. They created a subaltern linguistics project. They used an understanding of how sensory systems work and how we create knowledge and how we use symbols to create relationships. And they used that understanding of symbolic relationships to create a change in signage, which changed everything, changed the behavior. Now, that's an example of the kind of things I look at. So I look at not theory or books in the sense of what theory X, Y, Z is, or this discipline. No, it's not. I'm no longer interested in that. That's something I used to do in the past. I no longer do it. And I don't even endorse it anymore. Because instead I focus on looking at projects where I can learn that somebody did something and that changed things and made things better. I want to study that. I want to learn that. For example, in the context of Australia, their anti-tobacco campaign has been extremely effective, right? They have been able to reduce down and reduce the pickup of smoking in their communities. Now, because they have, how have they done it? That's what I'm interested in. Because by understanding what they did, for example, using the idea of contrasts, what happens when you smoke, what happens when you stop smoking, creating those contrast rituals and different ways of connecting to your different sensory systems. They essentially create a vision of how what your action is leading to, and what if you change your action will lead to, through that observation and through that campaign, which has been going on now for 20 plus years. They have slowly managed to bring it down. So my students and I study these campaigns and we look at how you do things. So instead of trying to describe language or critique problems or say why these problems exist, yeah, they exist. We know they exist. Who cares why they exist? Why you think and why I think might be different. Let's forget about that. Let's work together to fix it. Now, how do you fix it? By looking at other people doing other things and fixing other things in other places. You learn from them, and then you try and you make mistakes, and you try again and you make mistakes, and slowly you get confidence and you gain and you can develop more and more complex projects. You start with something very basic. So one of the things that I get over the last few months, a lot of people have been doing, you would have seen it even in certain parts of South Asia, is campaigning against fake news. Now, we can get our students to create resources and audiovisual materials and posters and flyers, educating people about what is fake news, how do you identify it, and why you need to stay away from it. Because we know fake news on social media is creating a problem for our people. So we can engage with our students and create resources. Now, if nobody else, the students who are making those resources are learning about it, and as they learn and they produce the material, other people learn about it, right? That's it. By creating this material, we create something that didn't exist. And we are not waiting for other people to come and do it for us. Why? We have the ability, we live in the present, we can take actions. We take the actions, we make our actions responsible again. That's one of the phrases I've been toying with. It's not the Trump thing, make America great again, or make Pakistan great again, or India. No. Let's make our actions responsible again. Let's make our actions responsible. Let's take responsibility for what we do and what our actions are. And as soon as we start doing that, we will realize that we maintain our integrity and self-respect. If we take our responsibility for our actions, things start changing because we start living in the present and take action in the present. And notice it's all practice and practice and practice, no theory. Get rid of the theory. Theory doesn't help us. What has theory given us over the last 60 years? Forget about the top tier journals and what, yeah, so you publish there, so what? I used to be the editor of Peace All Quarterly. Yeah, I did something. Yes, that's it, done. So what? What does the journal do? What do the top journals do? What do the publications do? Nothing. They just generate more discussion. I write a paper today, somebody writes a response tomorrow, third party, somebody else writes a response. We just talk and talk and talk. That's all academia. Just talk and talk and talk. Where is the action? Where is the practice? Are we taking responsibility for our actions? And if we start taking responsibility for our actions in academia, we will start to realize that we have to take practice and doing things as our key things, forgetting literacy, not categorizing between people because they have different levels of literacy. Literacy is just one of the things that you can do with your eyes. And as I said to you, and as I shared the example of the people around, that's just one thing. There are so many other things we do with our eyes.
Ahmar,
yes.
Thank you for your answer. We are running short of time, so I would ask Mariam Asif to please unmute yourself and ask whatever. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and thank you so much, Sir Ahmar, to introduce this idea that applied linguistics is not a discipline, rather it is a practice. I really like this idea, and I'll start working on it. I have a question related to the argument which you have just posed here in terms of tenses. You have said that we have morphological marking in English language. Rather, when we move towards Boli, it's not morphological in nature. So I have some query regarding that. If you can just explain this argument again briefly, so I'll be very happy with that.
Sure, I'll just think about it in English, right? So as I said, in English, there is no future tense. Why? Because there is no morphological marking on the verb that tells us what the future is. Right? So if I want to talk about past, I say came. Notice it's a slight sound change. And the sound change is telling us that there's a change in the time, right? But if I say, I will come, I am adding another word. I'm adding a modal. So it's not a tense anymore. In Boli, मैं खा रहा हूँ, मैं खा रहा था, मैं कल खाऊंगा, मैंने कल खाया था. Just notice, just try to utter it yourself and you will realize it isn't just a sound change. It's a lot of other work. You're adding new words, you're changing this, you're changing that. It's not a slight change. It's not just a tense. Yes, you can refer to things in the past. You can refer to things in the future. Nobody denies that. Of course we can do that. But that's not the same as saying it's a tense. And that's an important distinction to make. Because हमारी बोली में सिर्फ tense present है. Why is that so important? Because present may we can take action. Past and future are similar in each other with each other. Why? Because past or future may you cannot take action. You can only take action in the present. So notice that is marked with